I'd like to say a few words just to start about the BCAA and the reason for this hustings. The BCAA was formed at the beginning of last year as an umbrella organisation, now including more than 30 groups and organisations concerned about the climate emergency and wanting to see focused, creative and most importantly urgent action being taken by Buckinghamshire Council. The government's own advisory body, the Committee on Climate Change, has said that to reach net zero by 2050, the UK needs to have reduced emissions by 78% by 2035. That's just 14 years away, or we will miss the target. This requires a massive change in the way that we do things very quickly. The Council is in a unique position to take the county forward on its journey to net zero, both by its own example of reducing its own emissions and by using its role as a trusted partner to drive change across the whole county. The BCAA set up this hustings to allow people to hear the vision and policies of the major parties and independents, to ask questions about how they would do this. To that end, we have a representative from Labour, the Lib Dems and the Greens, and an independent. We did have another independent, but he had a COVID vaccination today and is not well enough to attend, unfortunately. The Conservatives will not be represented. We have been told that no one is available as the group are at another meeting. However, Martin Tett did provide a statement which we will read out as part of the proceedings. I will now hand over to our chair, Simon Keary, who will introduce our panellists, and we look forward to hearing what they have to say.
Many thanks. Thank you, Surinder, and welcome everybody to this hustings this evening. As Surinder has just said, we had originally lined up 6 candidates. We have 4 tonight. We have a statement from one of the independents, and we also have a statement from Martin Tett from the Conservatives. Just in terms of how we will work tonight, please put your questions onto the Q&A as part of the technology, and we will try and answer as many of those as we can. We have a number of questions already sent in, so we'll ask those panelists some of those questions as well. Thank you very much to those who've sent them in. Surinder is going to act as my wingman. We're going to ask each of the candidates to say a few words. We've given them about 2 minutes or so to introduce their policies and what they stand for and what their intention is around net carbon zero and climate change. We will then open the floor up to some questions and answers from yourselves. So please send those in. At the end of the evening, now we're planning to end sometime between 9 and 9:30. I would suggest it's probably going to be about 9. We'll see how things are going at that stage. Each candidate will also sum up in 2 minutes from what they've heard, what they've taken on board, and any actions they plan to do going forward as part of this discussion tonight. I'm extremely grateful to Bucks Climate Action Alliance, who've afforded the opportunity for this meeting tonight, but also Wickham Friends of the Earth, who provided the platform that we're all using. So without further ado, let's start with the Conservatives' message. This is the message sent. Thank you for the opportunity to have a short statement read out at the hustings organised by your group. I expect that you and representatives from other political groups standing in the election will make a big point about no Conservative attending your session. It would have helped had there been some prior consultation on dates, as unfortunately you have chosen the same evenings when the Conservative group regularly meets to discuss the agenda for the full council meetings on this Wednesday. It is also the evening for both Amersham and Chesham Town Council meetings. deliverable and fully costed and budgeted for. This contrasts sharply with many of the other parties and their policies that you will hear from tonight, who have had the luxury of being able to advocate virtually anything at any cost from the position of being in opposition, concern which with falls of over 50%. However, we have plans to do more. We have carried out a carbon audit, committed at least an extra £5 million towards reducing or offsetting carbon emissions and improving air quality. This will match fund at least the same again from other sources. Other council budgets will also contribute to agreed implementations. There are over 60 actions to achieve this. Lastly, I know that comment will be made tonight claiming the council's supposed lack of ambition on action on climate change. Comparison will be made with former district councils such as Chiltern and AVDC, who set in their final months targets for their own councils to become net zero by 2030. The reality is that the former district councils were very different organisations to the new Buckinghamshire Council, which is a vastly bigger and more complex organisation. I hope that your evening is informative and that you robustly challenge other participants about the acceptability, deliverability and financial robustness of their proposals. So that was the statement from the Conservatives this morning. Okay, Darren Hayday, the independent who sadly can't make it tonight, he's standing for independent candidate for the West Wickham ward. He writes, "My passion lies with litter and fly tipping eradication. I'm always out clearing litter, mostly from the roadsides or in the countryside. I help run an organisation called Clean Planet Today. Having worked as a councillor for nearly 20 years in Bucks, I want to help tackle the climate emergency heading our way while we still have limited time and options to help do our part in Buckinghamshire, as I do not feel that the current administration is taking it seriously enough." Now comes his 2-minute speech. "I believe Bucks Council need to do much more than they are currently offering regarding tackling climate change. Whereas they are aiming to be carbon neutral by 2050 or maybe sooner, there are a number of ideas that, if elected as a Bucks councillor in the local elections, that I would like to see happen. My wish list consists of the continuation of the electric scooters which are being trialled in High Wycombe and Aylesbury, creating more electric car charge points. We need as many people switching to electric vehicles to get us all away from fossil fuel. Helping to promote local green companies looking to champion new ideas that would tackle climate change. Dealing with the issues of fly tipping to drastically reduce down the reported cases in Bucks. Looking to bring in the bottle deposit scheme rather than see it as a threat from losing curbside collection revenue. The number of plastic bottles and cans I regularly litter pick is horrendous. We need to copy countries such as Germany, Austria, Sweden, etc., not as our roadside litter resembling developing countries such as Egypt. On the planning side, all new builds must be self-sufficient with their energy. They need heat pumps and solar or wind to give their electric supply rather than be on the grid. We need to move away from gas for our heating and use other resources. Finally, all council assets need to be carbon neutral in the shortest space of time as possible, aiming for 2030 rather than 2050. Kicking the issue into the long grass and hoping that it will be someone else's problem in the future is not the way to solve the problems. The temperatures are rising and this will mean drastic changes for the worst in which will affect the residents of even leafy Buckinghamshire. So thank you very much, Darren, for your statement. I hope you're feeling better after today. I'm going to introduce Tony Bradell next to say his 2 minutes. Tony stood as the Liberal Democrat parliamentary candidate for Wickham in the 2019 general election and is the current Lib Dem parliamentary spokesperson for Wickham. She is a Green Lib Dem and part of the Believers Against Climate Change community initiatives to effect change locally in Wickham. She is also part of the House of Lords task group on Syria and refugees and is passionate about the powers of community and the concept of thinking globally and acting locally. Tony, your 2 minutes start now. Welcome.
Thank you. The Conservatives have set and are proud of their net zero target of 2050 in Bucks, but that's too late. We have to do better. They're conspicuous by their absence this evening, and it shows their lack of commitment to this issue. Now's the time for decisive action, individually and collectively. Bucks Liberal Democrats are committed to leading on this, and as the largest opposition party at council, we will have the power to act. Our commitments are these. We will declare a climate emergency at our first council meeting. We'll set a target of carbon zero by 2030. Parts of Bucks have already declared this. We need to finish the job. We'll create a cabinet post at deputy leader level with responsibility for the environment portfolio, which will include annual reporting, every policy being quality assured on environmental grounds, improving the quality of our air, water and soil, public transportation, housing, whether that's retrofitting, rebuilding of energy inefficient buildings or new builds which are energy efficient. Ending the green bin tax, household recycling centres being open for 7 days of the week with no gate fee. Kinetic roads, they're already being trialled in Aylesbury West, expanding upon these which can generate electricity, and streetlights which are powered by solar panels. Rewilding, planting 150,000 trees per year on council-owned lands. Travel cards for under 16s for all public transport, divesting from fossil fuels, incorporating blue and green spaces into new developments, becoming one of the top 10 councils for recycling. Currently 4 out of 5 of the top councils are Lib Dem led. All car parks have charging points by 2025. These are all really key points, and we need to make sure that we're in a position to have the power to put them into action.
Tony, thank you very much for that. Next up is Stephen Guy. Steve is a candidate for Wickham Independents in Totteridge and Bowerdine. Wickham Independents are fielding 20 candidates in the High Wycombe area. Steve, over to you.
Oh, you didn't get my opening statement then, Simon.
I don't think
you didn't get my introduction paragraph.
Sorry, Steve, go ahead and read that now.
Yeah, sorry.
Can you include that in your 2 minutes? Well, outside of your 2 minutes, Steve.
I can do. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Do that. That's an admin error on my part. I apologise.
Steve, I have got it. Would you like me to do it?
Yes.
No, it's all right. I found it actually
from you.
Yeah, I've got it. Yeah. So Steve comes from. Yes, I thought it might. No worries. Thanks, Steve, and apologies. So Steve Guy is candidate for Wickham Independents in Totteridge and Bowerdine. Steve comes from an engineering background and is particularly passionate about man-made climate change, renewable energy generation, and an end to the burning of fossil fuels. Steve believes that the time for tackling climate change is now, and this must be considered in every decision the council takes over the next 4 years. Steve is also a keen promoter of zero-emission vehicles, which he believes not only help to tackle climate change, but will improve the air quality for all of our residents. Wickham Independents are fielding 20 candidates in the High Wycombe area. Steve, your 2 minutes start now.
Thank you, and hello, and thank you for having me. One of my earliest boyhood memories is of watching as the American astronauts visited the moon. And I thought it shows my age, but I thought as a young lad that we were a very clever race of people. And I developed a lifelong fascination for science. Well, since then, the population of the Earth has doubled. And I've learned, along with being very clever and ingenious, we can also be incredibly stupid. So, for example, I also learned as a young student all about the importance of carbon to all life on Earth and how everything is supposed to be in equilibrium and how we should not be pumping more carbon into the atmosphere than the oceans and forests are able to process. At some point in our history, humans thought it would be a great idea to dig up all the carbon that had been trapped underground for millions of years and burn it. In our naivety, we imagined that somehow oceans and forests would soak up all that extra carbon. And that's leaving out the fact that we also decided it would be just fine to cut down millions and millions of trees and pollute the oceans. And then we can all see now that if you pump all that carbon from fossil fuel back into the air, the climate starts to change inexorably. And let me tell you, the climate when the fossil fuels were laid down was not very conducive to the comfortable life of humans. If we want to stop or even reduce climate change, the time to act is now. Buckinghamshire Council voted last year to set a target of 2050 for Buckinghamshire to become carbon neutral. This is woeful and completely inadequate. I still think humans have the capacity to be very clever. I believe we can do much, much better. Changing the behaviour of governments and councils feels like trying to alter the course of a huge ship. It seems to take so long to effect change. But we don't have the luxury of time anymore. It's running out fast. We must act now. Buckinghamshire Council must set an example and become carbon neutral quickly. And it must also enable and encourage residents to do the same. We have all the technology that we need. What is lacking is the political will and the sense of urgency.
Steve, many thanks for that, and apologies for that stilted start, but
It's all right.
thank you very much for your message. Okay, next, David Norris, Beaconsfield, standing for Stoke Poges and Wexham, one of the founders of Bucks Labour Green New Deal group, who have formulated our green policy document, and policy officer for the Bucks Labour Forum, the coordinating body across the CLPs, so that green policies are central to our overall policy proposal, and that all candidates have signed up to those policies. David, let's hear from yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, so we have developed a 12-point plan, which is all based around expecting our councillors to take a leadership position and not be reactive. Like I think everybody here, we believe that 2050 is an inadequate target. It also shouldn't be seen as a target because you can miss targets. 2050 is an absolute endpoint, and the earlier is the better. Amongst our ideas, we believe that we need to fundamentally rethink buses. Margaret Thatcher thought that anybody over 25 on a bus was a failure. We have to change that mindset. We want to make local schools your natural choice because there is vastly too much driving children to school, busing children around. We have to reduce the volume of traffic. We want to then revitalise our town centres to make them social, cultural and economic hubs so that then we can plan how you use public transport to get people to those centres. We want to have an integrated transport plan which links up the county so that people can use whatever means of transport is the greenest to actually fulfill all of their key activities. We want to have housing which is healthy and energy efficient. That means building to new standards and it means retrofitting. We want to support agriculture which is sustainable, and we want to actually encourage that both locally and globally. So we actually want to see at a county-wide level that things like sustainable palm oil are adopted and enforced as our ways of working. We want to use the Green New Deal to transform using unionised, secure employment. We want to manage water resources on behalf of wildlife as much as mankind. We want to promote and protect woodland. We want waste programmes which drive reuse and reduce delinquent behaviour. We want to plan energy to create and distribute green power to all. So all of our councillors are being driven by those 12 principles, and all of our decision making will be based around green ideals. Thank you.
David, many thanks for that. Thank you. And last but no means least, we have Douglas Silverson, Douglas is the Green Party candidate for Little Chalfont and Amersham Common. He is representing the Green Party, who are fielding more candidates than ever before at this election. Douglas, over to you.
Good evening. So yes, I'm Doug Silverstone. I'm representing the Green Party, and as Simon said, we're representing some great candidates that we've got standing this time, and as he said, more than ever before. And I think that shows that there is a real passion out there amongst people who want to get involved and want to understand green politics and make a change, whatever party they're in. But the number that we have is growing more and more every time there's an election. And the candidates we have standing all show a real growing, all the candidates we have standing are from across the political divide. They're all brought together by one central tenet, really. It's that they've got a real passion for putting the climate first. Traditionally, politics is of the left, of the right, of Brexit, of left and right, and all of that sort of thing. Central to everything we do is the climate, and we build a new society based around that. And from when I've joined the Green Party, I've found everyone in the Green Party very collegiate, solution focused, and the idea is to bring everyone along with us to make the world better, really. We're not going to beat climate change as a collective if we leave the Tories behind. We live in Buckinghamshire. Realistically, there is going to be a large proportion of Tories on Buckinghamshire Council, and the fact that they're not here is sad to see, and we need to make them aware and educate them so that they can be part of the solution, because we're not going to do it without them. So it's about how do we engage those people to make sure that they are listening to what we're doing. We need to target climate change with the climate emergency and take the same laser focus that we've used to tackle coronavirus. We've thrown everything at coronavirus collectively as a society, and we've come up with solutions. We need to gear up to make that the same emphasis for tackling climate change. And significant change is needed. For that to work, we need people to embrace it, and we need people to understand it. We cannot afford to fight this amongst ourselves. At every level, we need to be doing things. So be that as a parish council, I myself have just taken up a council position on Little Chalfont Parish Council. We're replacing a building. When we replace that building, the first thing we need to think about is what impact is that going to have on the climate, so that we make changes all the time and revolutionize it. The way we run local amenities, we need to make sure everything from the bins on the park, take recycling. We need to make sure that parishes and the county council become a knowledge hub to make people aware of what they can do. I think a lot of people in the real world know that climate change is an issue, know that they want to do it. I'm now running through a time. We need to make sure that they have the ability to know what they can do to make an impact. And everything from the River Chess to making sure that pollution is cut. Martin Tate is right about one thing, though. None of us here have been on Buckinghamshire Council, but Buckinghamshire Council are failing, and the key to making sure that climate change is part of that is to make sure we've got other parties to hold them to account. And I think that's I've probably overused my 2 minutes, so apologies for that.
No problem at all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Doug. That's really helpful. And to be honest, I'm going to pick up on one of the things you mentioned. You mentioned about COVID, and interesting. It's hard to turn on the television at the moment without hearing about it. Perhaps I'd just I'll ask all panelists in turn, actually, but starting with Steve Guy. Steve, question: is the COVID emergency more important to solve than the climate emergency? Which one would you prioritise at the moment, Steve? Are you there, Steve?
Yeah, I am. Sorry, yeah, I'm afraid your audio breaks Steve, up a little bit.
That question: is the COVID emergency more important to solve than the climate emergency? Steve,
yeah. Can people hear me?
Okay, sorry, I'll put some headphones on. That might help. You carry on.
Yeah, as long as everyone can hear me. It's not an either or choice, I don't believe. I mean, I think a very good point was just made about the fact that the COVID emergency has shown what happens if people realise that something is an emergency, and all the scientists and the governments work together. And I think that you know, our response to that as a people has been very good. But I don't think it's an either or choice. I mean, you know, it'd be great if we could eradicate COVID from the world in the next 6 months, but that's not going to solve the climate emergency. And the climate emergency is costing lives every day. And air pollution is costing lives every day. And if we don't stop climate change, that's going to cost millions more lives. So I don't think you can make a choice and say, well, we'll prioritize one over the other. I'm afraid we have to respond with the same level of enthusiasm and cooperation to the climate change that we have done with COVID.
Tony, what's your view on this?
Well, I have to say I agree when Doug made the point that we have to adopt the same thinking about the climate emergency as we have done about COVID. COVID has shown us in the last year what can be accomplished. You can, you know, even from the point of view of bringing homeless people in off the streets virtually overnight, you know, what can be accomplished when we have the political will. And we have to stop treating the climate emergency at local and national government level as a nice to have. It has to be a must have. I don't think that these things are mutually exclusive. I think that there are massive benefits to kind of dealing with it all in one go. So whether it's tackling kind of health inequalities, fuel poverty, or exposure to air pollution, or access, the public health benefits of access to green and blue spaces, for example. One of my friends from university did a lot of research into that, and we're bringing him to speak to a group of people in Bucks about that. The green economy, you know, looking at jobs as we're sort of rebuilding from COVID, looking at jobs that are fit for the future, being able to sort of come out of COVID in a more conscious way. For me, it really isn't the sort of a mutually exclusive thing. I've just seen that somebody's commented what blue spaces. So we're talking about kind of marine areas. So whether it's wetlands or river spaces, you know, giving people enhanced access to those kind of spaces, which actually improve mental and physical well-being.
Thank you. Douglas, you mentioned it first. What's your take on the priorities here? COVID, or I mean, you mentioned COVID, but that was really around using the same priorities that we put to COVID to tackle climate change. Which would you see as the priority at the moment?
I mean, I do see COVID and climate change as symptomatic of the same way that we have society structured at the moment. So they are intrinsically linked in that the high travel urban landscapes that we have are part of the thing that caused COVID in the first place. And we're going to have more pandemics if we don't change the way we live, as we live more urbanized, more controlled. I think we are working out our way through COVID now, and it is time now to start putting the pressure on about how we deal with climate change. The other thing I was going to say is actually, if there's ever a silver lining, and I'm ever the optimist, that with Brexit happening and COVID happening, society has a perfect opportunity to change. There is never going to be a better time to make changes to the society as a whole, to tackle a new way of living for the future, if it's not coming out of a pandemic with Brexit on the back of it as well. So we can make changes for climate change because of the situation we find ourselves in. It just takes leadership and vision for us to focus our way through that.
Thank you. And lastly, I'm going to come to David Norris.
Yeah, the 2019 election was interesting because we were told that all of the things that the Labour Party were proposing could not be afforded. And yet for COVID, we have found that money. For the green agenda, which we're going to need to adopt, it is going to need huge sums of money. We can raise that money. We can afford these things. We have to actually tackle COVID, but do not delay tackling the climate crisis. And we have to find the money to do it. It's an existential threat. So I think that we have to balance these things off, but we have to do it. And we have to find the money to pay for it.
I was going to go to another question, actually. Some of you talked about food and consumption. I was going to say, Douglas, given the food system in the UK contributes to up to 30% of our greenhouse gas emissions, what can the council do to reduce this impact in Buckinghamshire?
Well, I think some of this is about Knowledge Hub and about giving the councils at all levels the ability to work with tenants so that they know how food is produced, locally produced. I myself helped set up Chesham Community Orchard, and that was part of the reason I did that, was to help people understand where food comes from. It was a real mechanism to go into schools, work with children there, that and show them this is an apple, this is what it is, it's very simple, you'll know about it, but we grow it on this tree, and talking to people so they can learn from that. I think the other side of it is the way that the council runs on waste as well. So food waste is a massive issue, and we've got a target to minimise, attempt to target a minimum 10% cut in waste volume, and part of that is food waste. If you set that target as a thing for the council to do, you have to tackle all the ways that food comes in. Now, as a council, we're not going to change the way Tesco's or anything like that work, but actually changing people's choices of what they buy from Tesco's is a way that we can impact that.
Okay. Tony, food system in the UK, greenhouse gases?
So I've been working in education for 21 years now, and yeah, I'm passionate about the power of education, whether it's working with children doing the kind of work around farm to plate, so children actually have a sense of where their food comes from, or teaching them about the benefits of eating less meat, or, you know, ideally kind of moving towards a vegetarian vegan diet. Fabulous if we could arrange that, but, you know, ultimately education. I agree really with what Doug was saying. You know, we've got some great initiatives already functioning within Bucks, for example, the community cooking and wellbeing kitchen within Wickham, community allotments, all of those kind of things which help people to understand more about where their food comes from, which challenges some of the kind of rhetoric around what healthy eating really looks like, and helps them to understand the impact of what we're putting into our mouths, what we're putting into our bodies on the environment. Again, cutting food waste, you know, how much do we waste at the end of a week of shopping? You know, how much do supermarkets get rid of? I think there's sort of, as Doug said, there's a challenge in getting supermarket chains to sign up to that. But I do think, you know, we've got a huge council with a £1 billion, you know, it's a £1 billion turnover. You know, we're talking about a significant force. You know, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could apply some pressure there and help to sort of become a part in educating some of those supermarket chains? Again, we've had success with this locally. So the community cooking and wellbeing kitchen that I've spoken of, they have Lidl and other shops who will give the food that would otherwise just go to landfill, that gets given to them to be able to work with the community to show them how to sort of produce healthy and sustainable food for their families. So there are all kinds of different possibilities, but I agree with a lot of what Doug said, actually.
Steve Guy, food systems.
Yeah, I think this is one of the areas where the council needs to do two things. It needs to lead by example for a start. So we need to look at how the council procures food for itself, because you can't be doing one thing and then telling residents to do another. One of the interesting things that's happened during the COVID crisis is that the council have demonstrated that they've got all our email addresses, and I'm sure you've all seen the regular COVID updates from Martin Tett over the last year or so. And I do think that because of the importance of the climate emergency, I'd like to see that email system to continue to operate going forward. and it should be doing two things. It should be telling residents on a monthly basis what the council is doing for the environment, and at the same time giving residents little tips and things that we can do. But they have to lead from the front. They have to lead by example. I am concerned by the number of residents that I speak to that say that they'd like an allotment but can't find one. So I think that's something that I'd like to look at too in my, certainly in my wards, that there's bits of sort of very much waste like land behind some of the housing that's used as at the moment for fly tipping and things like that. That makes me wonder whether we could encourage people to grow a bit more of their own food and allotments as well, because seems to be an appetite amongst the public to do it.
Yeah, I just want to bring in one point. I've seen it on the chat, and I think the Buckinghamshire Council have some of our email addresses. I don't think they've got them all, and the sense it's going to the majority of people, it is an effective. It is an effective mechanism, but it's not going to everybody. I know that. David Norris, to finish this, in terms of food system, greenhouse gases.
Yeah, well, as I said, I think we should be supporting agriculture locally and globally, which is supportive. I think one of the key things, as has been mentioned, is education. And as I said, we want our councillors to take a leadership position. And I think as a council, we should be taking a leadership position. In particular, I do think that we should be educating young people to eat a more vegetable-based diet, for vegetarian options wherever possible. If we actually all reduce the amount of red meat that we're eating, we could make a huge impact. So I think there's lots of
One of you, well, some of you have mentioned, is it about money? And I was just going to ask the question, what do you think is the most effective way to get concrete action on climate change strategy? Is it money, or is it effective staff, effective councillors doing things differently, and some other reason? How might we get actually some movement on this? I'm going to start, actually, Doug, you talked about money. What do you think? Is it important? Is money as important as councillors working on different things, effective staff? What's the most important thing here, Doug?
I mean, we live in the real world. Money is always important. But as I say, you spend the money now, the solutions we put in place are financed over a long period of time. So it's about showing how the changes we take, the big changes, are going to be financed and they pay back in the long run. I think there are lots of decisions the council take that if you put environment first, the cost impact of that isn't huge. And like HS2 is the big one. We spend millions on HS2 locally and it doesn't generate any benefits. Spending the same on much more integrated rail, integrated transport would be a much better way of doing it. Now I know HS2 isn't Buckinghamshire, but that's the point. We control what we spend, and every decision we take with that laser focus is environment first. Every decision we do, is it making the environment better? And that's why I think, yes, it's about money, but it's also about being clever with strategy.
Tony, the same question. Thanks, Doug.
Yeah, I think, the final point you made there, Doug, is really important. The fact that it's not just about money, in isolation, it's about where you can apply that pressure. And absolutely, it's one of the Lib Dem policies to have a deputy leader level cabinet post with responsibility for the environment portfolio, overseeing everything for its impact on the environment. And I think it's having that kind of degree of strategy, as you said, Doug, and it's difficult to disagree with anything you say at all. I think it's, as you said, it's kind of a long game in some ways, showing the impacts, financial impacts of some of these things, but being able to show the cost, you know, the sort of costs of the impacts on public health. Those kind of things are really important. I also think it's really important to be showing leadership. So of course, you know, money is vitally important, but one of the other things that in conversations with Conservative-led councils, they speak about wanting to be the first at something, you know, being able to show that we can be trailblazers. Right now, you know, Bucks isn't on the map in terms of its action on the climate crisis, and we could easily be. You know, there's so much more that can be done, and I think, you know, it kind of creating that momentum is really important as well. Another thing, you know, I'm passionate about thinking globally but acting locally, and that applies to us all individually. You know, whether it's individual councillors, at the end of the day, the council is made of individuals, all of those individuals making commitments to take action which actually impacts climate change, climate crisis. You know, I think it's the small things which also add to make the big things. So I think those kind of things, whether it's, you know, the council making a commitment to serve vegetarian food, to use providers who are using environmentally friendly means, you know, all of those kind of things are really important and make an impact. But I do think, as Doug said, it comes down to money, but it's putting the case for that very carefully and strategically.
I think that's a really good point, actually, Tony, because it's some of the small things are echo out there into with people, and some of the small things that actually the council can do. As you mentioned, there are a number of examples across the piece. David Norris.
Yeah, I think that obviously money is vitally important, but I do also think that leadership is key. What we actually saw with things like the carbon audit, which the council did, is they only really concern themselves with things that they are directly responsible for. If they've outsourced a service, then they're really saying it's no longer our concern. It's the people we've outsourced it to. So we actually would want to see Bucks Council taking a leadership position and really forging a link between central government and everybody's actions to drive a green agenda in absolutely everything which we do. So I think it's mindset as every bit as much as money that's required here.
Good point. Steve.
Yes, I mean, just to reiterate, really, there's an old joke where I come from that Conservatives know the price of everything and the value of nothing, and there's some truth in that. But just to give you a little example, if you, as I have done, decide that you're going to go to an electric car, now that costs more money as an initial investment, but it also costs a lot less money to run and to service and everything else. So you actually save money in the long run. So that's one point I'd make. But the other point is that very often it doesn't require spending the public's money always. So councils have got quite a lot of power to spend other people's money as well. So for example, I had a glossy leaflet through my letterbox today claiming that the council are going to double the number of electric vehicle charging points over the next 4 years. Well, I think that's pathetic. In my part of High Wycombe, the east side of High Wycombe, there are 2 electric car charging points on housing estates where people live, where they need them. So a doubling of that over 4 years would be 4, which would still be pathetic. But you are not necessarily spending the public's money to do it anyway. There's a couple of things. First of all, you get government grants are available. And secondly, you enable developers, you enable private companies to do these things. And there are other councils that are doing this much, much better than we are. Oxford, for example, is a great example. Where there are many, many more charging points in residential areas. But it's not because Oxford should have spent tons of money on it. It's just about the political will and taking it seriously.
Yeah.
I was going to just change the discussion a little bit. We haven't really talked about the built environment, and there is a question from that says, what changes will the candidates seek and actively support to local planning rules to ensure that draft climate change policy and pilot biodiversity project translate into action? So this is around the built environment, but also biodiversity in our natural environment as well. And I'm going to start with yourself, Tony. Tony.
So again, I think there are lots of different possibilities here. You know, I've already mentioned about the sort of retrofitting or rebuilding of energy and efficient homes, and about building of new builds being energy efficient. I think that sort of stands to reason. Ensuring that there are kind of blue and green spaces in new developments, making sure that, you know, where we are, as I said, you know, creating a deputy leader level post with responsibility for overseeing these kind of things, to make sure that there is a genuine commitment to this, that it isn't kind of, you know, waved out of the window. We've seen the change in the Conservative policy. The green belt is kind of gradually being eaten up, and that, you know, if you've got somebody in a cabinet level position who's responsible for overseeing those kind of things, it really does kind of keep those sorts of things in check. I think that's really really important. Again, you know, we've talked, I think there's one thing that we're not talking about here, and I've got to say, you know, it's not just, we've got to change the way that we're doing things. It's not enough to say, and I understand all the arguments for electric cars, but the point was really made, you know, saying about how CO2, for example, how much CO2 it takes to construct an electric car, and then what happens to the batteries afterwards, and those sorts of things. But I think we need to be looking at how we're living. You know, it's not enough just to try and make things more just slightly more sort of palatable for people. We actually have to be challenging the way that we, you know, that we're doing things, whether that's how we're living, so how we're living in the built spaces, you know, whether we're traveling to out of town retail parks, or whether we're, you know, whether we're looking at regenerated town centres. All of those sorts of things are really important. I think it's, again, it comes down to our local communities, you know, and changing the way that we think about things, changing the way that we relate to those local communities.
Sort of, are you saying this is really attitudinal change? It's far more deeper than just on the surface, you know, perhaps reducing planning or e-building.
Sorry, Simon, you cut out. I didn't hear you. I heard the first
Sorry.
part. I think there's a combination of two things. You know, of course, there is policy level stuff, but we really need to be looking at how we relate, you know, at our own attitudes, as you said, you know, whether it's to food, whether it's to transport. You know, it's not enough just to say, oh, well, I'll have an electric car. There's still carbon used in the production of the car. You know, there's still, all of those things are still have a footprint, and we need to be looking at changing the way that we live. And I think there's, you know, we are in this space right now where we have a possibility of doing something, really doing something brave, you know. And I think now, when people have had a year of living differently, now's the time to start challenging some of those attitudes.
David, you've talked about housing healthy and energy efficient. You've also got your 12-point plan. What's your take on this?
Yeah, so as I said, I mean, we see the revitalisation of town centres so that you actually create economic, social, cultural hubs where you discourage out of town development. You then get a integrated transport system so that people can walk to the centre, they can cycle to the centre, they can use public transport. And as I said, I mean, we see buses in one way or another as absolutely central. You might know that Matt Roder, our MP over in Reading, is a big proponent of buses. And I think we really do need to rethink. We need to get people out of their cars, because it's not just about carbon. Cars also create tremendous amounts of particulates. And so even if you have an electric car, every time you hit the brakes, you're still throwing out particulates. As you go along a road, the wheels are firing off particulates. So it is, as everybody has been saying, it's not just the cost of these things, it's the downsides that we're getting from our way of living. We've got to change our mindsets. We've got to get people to turn their back on their car. I mean, South Bucks, I believe, has some of the highest car ownership in the country. And it's going to be really hard to get people to leave their cars at home, but we have to do that.
Doug, built environment, planning, biodiversity, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Tony and pretty much everyone else that everything we're saying, it's really nice to see we're all sort of talking the same language, wanting to get forward. But on the built environment, I work for a housing association, so I see it firsthand, and it's a complex market, and there is a minimum viable product approach of they have a plot of land is difficult to find the land, build as many houses on that land as they can. And environment doesn't generally come first. But there is a lot of movement now in the housing sector about financing house building by tying in carbon reduction as part of that interest rate. So how we as a housing association have taken out a loan to build new houses. The lower the carbon impact of those houses, the lower our interest rate. So it's built into the economic model and the reward process to build better housing. I think in the planning process, we need to build in the things like Section 106 is a thing about that you have to fund community amenities as part of the planning. And I think building into that, when a planning application comes through for a large amount of properties, they fund local solar energy, local wind energy, and that takes in locally owned, publicly owned renewable projects that then reinvest income into the local community to do even more. And it's things like that that we've got to start thinking about to make really real change in mindset, as everyone's been saying. That's the starting point for it.
Steve, Guy, I guess you're not going to say a lot different, are you?
Not really, no. I mean, I think you're right. I think what councils can do is obviously, first of all, is councils have some influence over planning decisions in their area, although we are to some degree tied by government policy who keep liberalising planning law. But nevertheless, we have some influence on the built environment and housing development in particular. I totally agree with the out of town shopping destinations just encourage people to jump in cars, whereas some of our town centres are looking rather sad and neglected. And yes, it's going to be lovely to get more people on public transport. I will caveat that with the fact that I've visited and worked in countries where public transport is much better used and more popular. And they all have one thing that we don't, which is that there is a subsidy to public transport, because we have a model in this country where we try and make buses run profitably and not necessarily for the public good. Now, I'm not convinced that the council on its own can do too much to change that. And this is a bigger picture. But if you really, really want to get people back onto public transport, you've got to make it a cost-effective option. And if you, at the moment, catch a bus into town, you'll find it costs at least as much as it costs to go in your car. And then if there are more than one person in your car, you start to think, well, why would I pay all that bus fare? I'd love to see the High Wycombe to Bourne End railway line reopened. At the moment, if you want to get from High Wycombe to Slough by train, it costs you £50 over return, more than £50 return at peak time. And you have to go into London and go to a different station and then come out again because there's a little piece of the railway network missing. Thank you, Dr. Beeching. But some of these things, the council are not going to be able to do on their own. Some they can. I think building development, housing, where, out of town shopping versus making town centres destinations. These are things we can do. And the other thing that I think the council can do and must do is improve cycle routes. So if you want to cycle into High Wycombe from Loudwater, where I am making this call from, you can't do the whole journey on a safe cycle route. You've got to do some of it on the main road or on footpaths, and it's not joined up. And in many cases, the routes that cycle routes could go on exist. There, you know, the disused footpaths and disused railway lines that could be converted into good cycle routes would make it a lot easier for people that want to cycle.
I think that cycling's a good point. Talking about public transport, an evening can't go by, especially when we have the panelists in front of us, without talking about HS2. Sorry, folks, I did have to mention it. I just wanted to start. I'm going to start with David, actually. In view of the uncontrollable rising financial and ecological costs of HS2, will you push for a final independent review of the project, the recommendations of which will be accepted? So, David, over to you. We may not get this chance, obviously, but David?
If I was in charge, I would stop it tomorrow. I just don't see the point of it at all. I think that, you know, things like that, the video, which you've probably all seen with David Attenborough talking about the tree, which is over 200 years old, cut down just to make a service road. I just don't see the point. That what we should be doing is investing in internet. No, I think from us all working at home for the last year, we've shown that we don't need to travel around to do business. Now, there are much better ways to spend a fraction of that money to achieve the same economic outcomes. So I just think it should be reviewed very, very quickly in the new light of discovering this new world that we now live in. We should invest money in the internet. You know, free internet for all was poo-pooed in 2019, but I think we all see it's pretty good now. But just get rid of that train, because I know it's there as well to change the capacity, but there probably are better ways of spending the money, and the route appears to be just too destructive.
You're nodding, Tony.
Yeah, David, I completely agree with you on pretty much everything you said. I think this, as I've said before, I think this last year has shown us how differently we can live. You know, we've reimagined a new world that we never thought would be possible. We've been working from home. The amount of traffic was on the roads was massively decreased. You know, children were studying from home. There are all kinds of different possibilities that when HS2 was conceived were just not even on the table. And I think, you know, I have many problems with the process of HS2, the spiraling costs, the environmental impacts are the two most significant ones for me. But I really think, you know, we're in a different world now. And I absolutely think that we should be challenging attitudes. Again, you know, focusing on encouraging people to work from home, encouraging people not to travel, you know, if they don't need to, showing people what is possible with this new reality we now have. I think, as I've said, I think we have a once in a lifetime opportunity to kind of create that brave new world, if you like, from where we are now, because we've been living it for a year. Although it's, you know, despite its other challenges, if there is a silver lining, that would be it.
Doug, I suspect you're not pro HS2, but what would you do with the money?
I mean, just to say, I mean, HS2 we've been consistently against HS2 right from the start, and I don't think any other political party has as consistently been against it. And I saw someone in the chat say about all the local councillors are also against HS2, and rightly so, they probably do disagree with it, but when push comes to shove, they will take the Tory whip and they will vote whatever way they're told to vote. I can tell you HS2 would stop tomorrow, well, would stop on May the 7th, if all the Tory councillors that said they were against HS2 threatened to resign the whip for a day. That would stop HS2. So they can stop it, and we can, and we should. The truth is that the business case for HS2, it's funny we were talking about business cases early being long term, but the business case for HS2 won't stack up, and it won't stack up because climate flood predictions mean that we won't need to live that way. And as I mentioned earlier, as other people have mentioned, that the post-COVID, post-Brexit world means we are creating a new world. And it's something that Buckinghamshire can do as a council, and we can invest in making our towns a place to work. We can start investing in our towns to make them more feasible, more useful for us to actually work from home and provide amenities for people who do work from home. Because I think we've all struggled when we're working from home, and it needs a different town around us. And part of that is where we should do. And obviously, we should invest in green transport. We should clean green buses and active transport, and making sure that all of those remote areas do it. And I'll just touch on one more thing about electric cars, because there is a couple of people have said it, that electric cars still produce CO2 at production, and every car that we take off the roads is a far better way of doing it. And when we're moving to the future, we've got self-driving cars as well. And I think there's a lot of potential for self-driving cars to reduce the number of cars in Buckinghamshire, but that's much further down the line. But we should start looking at that technology after as well, to start readying ourselves for that.
Thank you.
We can't hear you, Simon.
Sorry, David. What would your first priority to be with the money? David, can you hear me?
No, Simon.
David,
your sound is really
can you hear
breaking
me?
up.
Sorry. Yeah, I'll put it in the chat, David. Money invested from HS2.
So it's the question, Simon, what would you do with the money that wasn't going into HS2?
Yes, that's right. To David. I don't think David's answered, has he?
Yeah, I answered at the start. So I think it's Steve, isn't it?
Well, I don't think I'd answered your previous
Steve,
question, really.
Yes, I'm getting confused. My fault.
Well,
Go on then, Steve.
Well, this is where I make myself unpopular and point out a few home truths. The most environmentally friendly way to travel long distances is electric rail. And the Conservatives, the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party nationally have assessed the case for high-speed rail in the UK and decided that overall it's the right thing to do. And it's very hypocritical that members of all of those parties in Buckinghamshire are dead set against it. Because it's not popular in Buckinghamshire to be in favour of high-speed rail. Let me just point out something that's happened in France. In the last 2 weeks, they've passed a law in France banning short-haul flights. And the reason that they've done that is because they have an adequate high-speed rail network. In Japan, they've had a high-speed rail network for 50 years. We are, for the country that invented railways, we are woefully behind the rest of the world. And I think that it's just hypocritical and wrong to think, well, I'm standing in Buckinghamshire, so I'll just be against HS2 because that's the convenient option to take. I think that there's a lot that's wrong with HS2. There's a lot that's wrong with the way it's been implemented and the way that the local environment's being treated by the contractors. But the principle of having a high-speed rail network is not wrong, and it's the right thing for the climate emergency, for climate change. A Zoom lifestyle from ever more now because of COVID. I think quite the opposite. You know, people are going to have a pent-up desire to go and visit friends and family and loved ones that they've not been able to go and see. Yes, work-wise, we Zoom meetings, but not for our families. Also, another fallout from COVID is going to be a lot more people wishing to holiday in the UK this year. And the alternative to railways is either roads or air travel. Which is the least environmentally impactful of the three?
Thank you. Thank you. Start to pick up that challenge really from Steve to some extent. Doug, in terms of people still commuting, perhaps not working at home as much as they should be. I mean, how do you see it going forward? What's your view on things?
Yeah, I mean, first, I think Steve was calling them the other parties hypocritical. I hope he wasn't saying the Green Party's hypocritical, because we have been consistently against the HS2 from the start. So I think,
yes, no, at least you've been consistent.
Yeah. So I think that's the point. But yes, I mean, what I would say is that before we ask what is the most efficient and energy effective and environmentally friendly way to take a journey, we should be asking ourselves as a society whether that journey could be avoided. Every journey you cut out is less CO2. Now, yes, we're going to need to travel to see people. Yes, there's still going to be work to do, and there will be journeys we will have to do. But everything we can do to minimize a journey is a good thing. Reducing the current demand on the railways allows people to use the railways that would be using cars. So that's my answer to that. And yes, we invest in it all. And yes, we need more rail, and we should be investing rail over anything else. But it doesn't mean capacity is two-sided. You either increase capacity or you reduce demand. And I think investing in our towns gives people a reason to stay local. It gives people a way to communicate. And I agree that Zoom isn't going to be everything, but it is going to be a much bigger part of the way we work and meet and socialize with our friends and family as well. It's not going to replace it, but it is going to improve it. So yeah, I guess that's my answer for that.
Tony, you talked about more charging points. You talked about travel cards. So it sounded like you were in favour of travel. Doug is laying down the gauntlet of about trying to travel only where necessary. Do you agree with Doug, or do you think actually reality is that we still will have to travel as much as we do, if not more?
I agree with Doug, and I don't think he was saying one thing or the other there. I think, I absolutely agree. The first question should be, is this journey necessary? But then where those journeys are necessary, we need to be looking at sustainable ways of making those journeys. So whether it's, vehicle sharing, car shares, or whether it's energy efficient public transport, whether it's cycle routes, all of those things. But I think the first question absolutely has to be, and which is what I've been saying, how are we living? We've got to start asking different questions to begin with. And of course, Zoom isn't going to be the only thing, but it has shown us what's possible. If you'd have asked me a year ago, could I work from home in the way that I had been? I probably wouldn't have imagined it in the way that I have. But we were forced into a situation where the option of doing it or not doing it was taken away, and we've adapted to sort of compensate for that, to take that into account. And it comes back to this point of treating the climate emergency as a crisis in the same way that COVID was seen as a crisis. If we do that, then we're able to start asking those different questions.
Tony, I really like your point about really looking at ourselves, about how we are living. How might we do that? How might the council do that in the new office? I mean, how would you support the council to do that? Is that a survey? Is that a massive conference, climate change conference? How would you possibly promote that?
Well, I think, this is a huge thing, isn't it? A huge sort of topic in itself. So there's definitely education to be done. I mean, look back to when I was a child, the whole Keep Britain Tidy campaign in itself reduced littering by a massive amount. There are those kind of initiatives in terms of communications which are possible. Education is massive, and also giving people. So there's a certain degree of educating, there's a certain degree of kind of carrot in this situation, and there's a certain degree of giving people a range of choices, none of which are detrimental or as detrimental to the environment. I think we have to start taking away some of those options, if you like, which aren't the ones which are the most detrimental, and making sure that the choices that are available are, you know, obviously bringing people along with that. That's where the education goes hand in hand. But leadership, again, this comes back to leadership, individual and collective leadership, working together, changing the way that we live, changing the way that we work. So whether it's kind of, you know, emphasizing the benefits of co-working, of co-housing, you know, all of those kind of things, the way that we relate to one another, citizens' assemblies, there are so many different possibilities for changing the way that we are living and working together, which change the way that we relate to all of these issues.
David, you've talked about leadership, Bucks Council taking a leadership position. What's your view on this whole subject?
Yeah, I mean, one of the points that Tony just made about citizens' assemblies, we think is absolutely vital, that you actually need to bring people with you. You can't just have this as a message coming top down, but then you've got to stop those assemblies being whipped by a small elite group. It actually has to be about education, about involvement, about giving people the time to think through all of the arguments. So they've got to be supported, but we will need fundamental change. And I do believe that it's got to be done democratically by involving as many people as possible.
I'm going to ask a bit of a challenging question, I think, next, and it's going to go to Steve. All of a sudden, you have turned into Martin Tett, and you're sitting there just after the elections. You've just won the election as a Conservative leader, and you're in power. You've got Greens, you've got Independents, you've got Lib Dems floating around you. What are you going to do first if you were Martin Tett? What would you do, Steve?
Well, it's rather a scary thought, but if I was to suddenly find myself the leader of Buckinghamshire Council, the first thing I would do is declare the climate emergency and declare that Buckinghamshire councillors of all stripes were going to work together to see what we could do to make Buckinghamshire carbon neutral by 2030 and not 2050. That would be my first thing. I would also be looking at suppliers. I mean, I noticed one or two of the people who are watching are mentioning electricity generation in the chat. I would like to know whether Buckinghamshire buys solely renewable electricity, like so many of us opt to do at home now. We've already talked about sourcing of food. I am bitterly disappointed and outraged that the Buckinghamshire Council has recently bought a fleet of new diesel vehicles. That's got to stop. That's got to stop. We have to lead from the front. We have to be a green council if we expect our residents to lead greener lifestyles.
I think that's a message that most of our panelists have said, that this starts at home, doesn't it? Really, Doug, you're now Martin Tett.
I mean, yeah, it's a funny place to be, but I genuinely love it. The conversations we've had today, I think it shows that there is great will amongst lots of people in Buckinghamshire. The fact that 96 people are still participating here shows there is drive. So if we woke up on May the 7th with Martin Tett as the leader, but with representation from all the groups here that could push for that, I think that would be a really positive step. And I would hope that if I was Martin at that point, I would say, actually, something's changed here. The culture is beginning to change, and we need to quickly account for that, and we need to listen. And I would hope that would be the start of it. And we do start, as Tony and David and others have been saying, about citizens' assembly and stretch it to as many people as possible, because it's going to affect all of us. All of us will need to change. As green as any of us think we are, none of us are probably doing enough, and we can all do more. And how we can do it is to work together, and hopefully that is the outcome that will happen on May the 7th. We can work through it.
Good point. Tony, you're now sitting there, you're in power.
I love following Doug, because I agree with most of what you're saying, Doug. You know, I think some of the work that I do is conflict resolution with the Middle East, and where you have that, you always kind of chunk up to where you meet consensus, and then you work back down through the details. So the consensus is that, you know, that we need to declare the climate emergency. That has to be the first step. And then from there, it absolutely comes down to collaboration. You know, we have to stop this attitude of just focusing on, you know, the fast wins for the next 4 years. The climate emergency is not going away within the next 4 years. The behavioural changes will not have all happened within the next 4 years. You know, we need to be working together. Absolutely, as Doug said, it really fills me with hope to hear us all, you know, from different parts of the spectrum saying a lot of the same stuff. Yes, there are differences in terms of policy and, you know, certain aspects, but actually fundamentally there's a real will for people to work together. And I think one of the most important things that's going to come out of this election is that when you have the Conservatives realizing that they can no longer be complacent, that their majority, that their hold over the council is being whittled down, at that point, you have that, you know, you have some power to make them listen to the sea change that's happening. I think that's the vital thing. And at that point, we have to absolutely be unified in pulling together to say this has to happen now.
I think that's what a lot of people are saying. This has to happen now. Very important message. David Norris, the last from you.
Yeah, so if I was Martin Tett, I would definitely declare, but not only a climate emergency, but I believe there is an ecological emergency as well, and that we can only tackle that by getting a long-term plan. And actually, to do that, we need everybody to buy into the sorts of fundamental changes that are going to be required for us to save it's the planet and mankind. It is an existential threat.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we're coming to the time where I'm going to ask you all to summarise your position. One of the interesting things is I sense tonight, if never before, I'm sure before, that many of you have realised, I think all of you have realised that you've got more in common than you ever thought. And I suspect you'll differ on other policies, but this may be something that you will all agree on. I'm going to start with Tony, really. Tony, can you wrap up in your 2 minutes and perhaps summarise what you've heard other panellists say, what you wanted to add on top of what your original 2 minutes was, and just provide a summary for your position at the end of the day. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I think the key thing here, the key takeaway, you know, we're all here because we care deeply about the environment. We want to see the climate crisis slowed down or reversed. You know, we want to see that happening. I don't think that's any secret, and we need to work together. And this is a wider issue than even the climate crisis. You know, the toxicity and the tribalism in politics doesn't serve any of us. It doesn't serve our communities, and we need to work together on all of these issues. So that's the main thing for me that's coming from this. You know, some of the best work I've seen happen across all sectors has come from working together, and I think if we adopt that sort of approach and a longer term view, then we'll get there, you know, and we'll actually solve these issues, or you know, sort of make inroads into solving these issues, which have, you know, don't stop at party lines, as I've said. And in wrapping up, so we're long overdue decisive action on climate emergency. We need to hold the Conservatives to account. We no longer have the liberty of postponing action. We need to act now, individually and collectively. We need to change the way that we are living and working. There needs to be an attitudinal change. And we need to elect representatives who are committed to action and with the power to make it happen. Now, clearly, you know, as somebody who's part of the Buckinghamshire Liberal Democrats, I know that we are the second, the largest opposition group, and I would love, you know, for us to have your votes on May 6th. But ultimately, this is a vote for the climate, and I think, you know, it's really important to understand that all the policies that we are talking about here and now are the first stage. This isn't something that's going to end in 4 years, as I said. You know, this is one step in the journey. It mustn't end there. You know, we're talking about net zero, but we actually need to be talking about carbon negative. You know, it's something we haven't mentioned this evening, but it's something we should certainly be aiming for. We are, as a party, locally ambitious about our role in tackling the climate emergency and about our individual and collective responsibility for that. But we need your votes to make that happen, whether it's, you know, as I've said, ideally we would love it if you'd vote for the Liberal Democrats, but ultimately vote for the power to hold the Conservatives to account and to take action on the climate.
Thank you, Tony. Steve Guy, Steve.
Thank you, and thank you very much for organising this event this evening. I think it's been valuable for those of us taking part as panelists as well, and as has been said a few times now, it shows that there's quite a lot that unites us, and there's quite a lot that we have in common, and sometimes we might differ on the detail and on the best way to achieve the climate objectives. But I really do hope that we can all pledge here tonight that if we're all fortunate enough to be elected on May the 6th, that we're all going to work together on this. In the past, you know, there's, I mean, the best example I can think of is in the Second World War, we had a government of national unity where politicians from both sides of the House decided to work together because there was something more important going on. And it feels a little bit like that, really. It feels a little bit like what we actually need to do is all of us to work together, and that includes the Tories. The problem is that if there are too many Tories on the next council, they will feel that they don't need us. And as their opening statement sort of suggested, they kind of feel like they're doing enough, and they feel like they're doing as much as they can. And if they have an overwhelming majority again after the election, I fear that that will continue. But if their majority is reduced and there are more councillors, more independent councillors and councillors from other parties on the council, they'll have to work with us. And the second thing is that I'd like all of the opposition councillors to work together better than they have. They haven't always worked together as well as they possibly could over the last few years. And I think that because it's a world emergency, not even a national, it's a world emergency that we're all part of, that we need to be able to be civil and work together to achieve our common aims. And I'm sort of here to say, if I'm lucky enough to be elected, that I pledge to do that. I pledge to work with anyone in the new council that wants to work seriously about reducing climate change and making. And I do believe, as I said in my opening remarks, that the carbon balance is the key thing. There are lots of other things that would be nice to have, and air quality is one that I care a lot about because that affects a lot of people's health. But the key thing that we have to do is to stop burning fossil fuels, and it's possible. There is technology available in everything that the council does to stop burning fossil fuels. We just have to agree that it has to be done. So that's it from me anyway. Thank you all very much for coming, and thank you all very much for listening. Hopefully I'm going to end up working with some of you in the future.
Thank you, Steve. I think we've made many friends tonight. David Norris.
Yeah, I would just like to say that I trust that moving forward, we all can continue to show the ambition, the ideas that has been shared collectively here, and that we do hold, the Conservatives will undoubtedly hold the balance of power, but we will hold them to account. We will make them actually recognise the importance of this issue. It's not going to go away, and we will keep on at them to do it correctly. And together we can make them see that this is really, really important.
Thank you. And lastly, to sum up, Doug.
Yeah, I mean, to echo everything that everyone said, I'm really energized by this debate now, and I'll finish by saying that I agree with Tony on a lot of what she was saying that as well from this. And it just, we all say the same things, and we're none of us are going anywhere. So whether we're elected or not, it's really great to see some real great people talking, saying the right things to get change there, and that pressure is only going to build. So whatever happens on May the 6th, it's a really exciting time. I would say that I call out to the people that are still listening. There are a number of you there. There were a lot of people that don't vote, and I would say to anyone on the call, go and find people that don't vote tell them what you heard tonight and tell them to vote. Make their voices heard, because we need everyone to be part of this. So tell as many as you can to vote for vote. Just get out there and vote for who you think is going to make the best climate change. And like I say, the more people we get that don't vote for the things, the better diversity we'll have on the council. The bigger, from our point of view, the bigger the Green Party vote is a very big, obvious sign that environmental issues matter. And that's the biggest pitch I can say for everyone. So thank you all for listening to me, and thank everyone else on the panel. It's been really energizing for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. That's a really great note to end on. Just before I thank my panelists and collaborators, Surinder, there's been a question on the chat about recording, where people can find some of the details on this. Is that going to be published somewhere?
Yes, it will be recorded, and we will release a link to it, probably through our website and on our Facebook page, I should imagine. But yes, a recording of this will be available.
I'd like to thank Tony Brodell, Steve Guy, David Norris and Douglas Silverson for all attending. I mean, the fact that you did attend and you did speak extremely well, I think you've made a lot of friends, and it's been a thoroughly fascinating and interesting evening. I have really enjoyed listening to everything you've said. And you've also said that with commitment and belief in the moving some of this forward. I'd just like to thank really Bucks Climate Action Alliance for organising this tonight, and thank you, Surinder, for your fantastic support for this. Also, Wickham Friends of the Earth. Lastly, I just really want to thank our fabulous audience. There's been some great questions come through on the night, which we hopefully picked up as many as we can. We've had ones before that we've covered as many as we can of those. We started the evening as just a small group of friends. With the audience and with all of you now, we seem to be a power force with many votes. So please vote wisely and well. I'm really grateful for you attending the meeting tonight. Thanks for your involvement. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Have a good evening. Thank you very much. Thank you.